So without wasting much time, let's dive into the software estimation. So what does really software estimation mean? So when we talk about estimation, it's about having an idea. What is estimation? So you can have a look at estimation in several contexts. It could mean not just software, but you could mean something like, for example, if you want to build a house, you need an estimation. If you want to build a platform, you need an estimate for some digital platform, you need an estimate from the IT development team. If you want to do any piece of work, you first need to have a plan and a goal. So the basis for all of these is basically the estimation in terms of how much time it would take, what is involved, what are the resources required, and how can we approach that. So that's the fundamental aspect of it. So if you ask me what is estimation, it can be called as a rough idea of something. It could be a very high level plan. Somebody say it can be approached in this way. So an estimate or a blueprint for a house, for building a house, you can actually have an estimate of that. You actually have a model, brief model in terms of where each room would sit in. So that's an estimate. And then it could also be a view or an opinion based on your own instincts, or it's very subjective sometimes. It's not really objective. So in that context, what I would say is that in the development of a particular digital product or any mobile application or enterprise software system, we would need a kind of a roadmap. It actually gives you the handles, the tools and the measures and the information that you would need to actually lay the roadmap for building that particular product. And so that is very definition of what I think is a good estimation. So it should help us to come up with a plan, with a roadmap in terms of how we're going to approach the development of a particular platform, application, system, or a project. So in the context of a definition, for example, you can actually say that for an IT team, it is a quantified evaluation of the efforts in terms of the number of person days, person months, or person hours that is required for performing a particular task. It could be as simple as building a database, or it could be as complex as actually building a huge digital platform. A e-commerce website, for example, could be the final outcome of this particular exercise. So it really depends on whether you are actually estimating for a specific task, where, like, for example, adding a new table in a database, or it could be for building a huge platform, which could take years to complete. So it really depends, and that's where we need to have an estimate in terms of how big or how small that one is. And as we mentioned, it's important that you understand the relative aspect of the size, the effort, the duration, and the cost. All of these are important. So we'll have a look at each of them in greater detail now. So when we talk about estimation, you understood what it is in the normal context as well as in the IT development. But for actually going ahead with the estimation exercise, you need to understand the value, the real value that is offered by an estimation exercise. So it is actually a journey from a very hazy, from a picture which is actually not really giving a good idea to you, to a much clearer, much sharper picture about something. It could be as simple as getting something out of a particular software application, or you could actually try and talk in terms of building a mobile app for a foreign language interpretation, something like a Duolingo. For anything in this world, you would need the first question, even before you start working on that, the first question people would ask is, give me an estimate, give me a rough idea, how much it would cost, how much it would take, what time it would take, and then how many resources, soft and hard resources, how many people, how many software applications, how many servers that you need to be able to complete that. So in that sense, you can actually say that when you initially start off anything, you've got an idea to build an e-commerce website. That is just an idea at that point of time. You're just starting off as a concept. But from there on, you need to actually do some work. You'll have some wireframes, you'll have some sketches, you've got some rough models, a basic design in place. you could have a database, and then finally you can actually start coding, and then putting together some aspects, and then start actually delivering the functionality. So as you see, initially, it's a bit hazy. You don't know what you're trying to develop. It's a very woolly, as you say, a very woolly picture in terms of where it is. You've said 30,000 feet overview of the stuff that you're really looking at. At that distance, at that height, you really don't have any idea in terms of the detailing. As I say, the devil lies in the details. You would not have any idea of the specifics of that. In that context, your estimates, you still need to do estimation. You still need to have an idea where you're going, what you're trying to accomplish. And for that particular point of time, your estimation could be it's way out in terms of the accuracy, if you ask. So that would be about plus or minus 50% in terms of reality, the actual versus what you've estimated. And then when you actually start building up the functionality, and we are in the formative stages, as what we call, then your estimation actually kind of gets narrowed down, because you've got a better handle. You understand better how many database tables are required, what technology you're using, how many tools do you need to finish the design, how many classes are there in the context of your specific functionality, and what are the interfaces that you need, how many systems you need to interact with. So you're getting a little bit closer in terms of the actual dependencies, the constraints, the challenges, and what you need to really do to get the work done. So that's where in Agile context, we call that as definition of done. So when you actually get down to the specifics, you're actually trying to understand that, what are the things required for you to complete a functionality? What are the acceptance criteria? When you get down to these levels, what are the wireframes? How should it look like? You're actually talking more in terms of the harder aspects of the detailing. So here at this point of time, your implementation oriented estimate is what we call the development related stuff. The estimates that you actually come up with, the accuracy could be really, really very fine grained, and it could be just about 5 to 10% plus or minus in terms of the actual. So you can actually get to see the reason for that is basically that you've got more and more detailing, more and more handle on the variables, on the things that are the factors, external factors, as well as internal factors that could affect your estimate. And so it is important you actually kind of understand this, in what stage you're trying to do the estimation. Is it in the early stages, or is it in the formative stages of development, or is it at the much later stage? Once you complete a project and then somebody asks you, can you give me a quote for the same kind of a website? If you want to build a similar one for me, how much would it cost? So you actually have a better feeling about it then than when you were asked 2 years before that, when you didn't have any clue whatsoever. So in the context of that angle, what we need to understand is the cost factors. First of all, the first thing that comes into estimation is, when people ask you estimates, they're talking about how much would it cost me to build something like this. So it would be, for example, the costing could be in terms of the specific reporting periods. Is it with the financial year, this financial year, next financial year? So you've got the period dates, for example, that comes into picture. You've got the total effort from all the people involved. Now you've got distributed teams working in different countries now, from people in the UK, India, China, Russia, Poland, people across different teams. You've got these collaborative distributed teams trying to actually work on the same platform, in a collaborative manner. So the effort would actually be a sum total of all of these. Similarly, you also need to look at, in terms of development, it would be the front end, the middleware, the APIs, and the application logic, as well as the data layer, the back end. So it's a sum total of all of these that you need to say that this is the effort, the total effort. It cannot be just build a screen and I'm done. No. Even if you build a screen where you capture the details, that is important, that you need to save the data somewhere, right? So you need to have a database. You need to have some kind of a data store where we actually capture the data, whatever is being saved or whatever is being performed by the user. So you need to have a backend for that. So unless you look at this in a complete, in totality, in its entirety, you cannot estimate the individual parts and say that is done. So you need to have this We'll talk later about the top-down versus bottom-up estimation. So that would give you a better idea. And then in terms of the errors, so we also need to understand what are the kind of errors, how are we going to manage the defects? What is the time to actually identify and separate the error and then have an action to correct the error? You might have heard just the other day, even yesterday and today as we speak, there was a news that came out about the error by the health department, the Public Health England, PHE, which actually committed a small error, and that resulted in about 16,000 odd numbers that have the cases that have not been reported on the COVID-19 deaths list, which is massive. And one of the reasons that was touted for that was the usage of Excel spreadsheet. I don't know how that really happened, but so that there is even a small defect in some case in the context of the tool that you're using could actually result in a massive error somewhere. How you're going to manage that, how you can actually come up with the recovery of that, and what is the source, and what is the type of error. The classification is it severe, is it just cosmetic, just that can be ignored or just touch upon the cosmetic defect, or is it something like a showstopper? Once something happens, the whole site goes down. So for example, a case in point is the Ticketmaster website. When they launched some of the concert of a very popular musician, they wanted to go live and they invited people to say that, yeah, start booking. And then the whole site went down because it could not bear the load. The load was what was a problem, and it was not scaled. It was not scaled enough to be able to take up that kind of hits, that kind of number of massive hits to the website. So in terms of process character, you also need to think in terms of what processes, what kind of languages, tools that you're using. Is it for Java? Is it for open source? Is it for example, you're talking about a house, building a house. Are you building a house? Is it a bungalow? Is it a small little detached house? Is it a series of houses? Is it a flat? Is it an apartment? Depending on that, your estimate would really vary. It also depends on quite a lot of other things. We'll go into the details later. So it does depend on the languages. It does depend on the platform, the tooling that you're using. It also depends on indication of use significant processes. Some of the processes are very important. For example, in the context of an e-commerce website, you might actually want to use or outsource your card payment or payment processing. So you're not dealing with any of the cards yourself, in which case it's called PCI, payment card industry. So you don't have to really go through all the nuances and the regulations that come under the PCI ruling, for example, to not have the anonymous details or not store the personally identifiable information of a particular card holder. So all of these details you can skip if you kind of outsource that to a third party. And then we also talk about some of the measurement study goals. So what are the kind of metrics, the measures that you would need to understand, to assess how efficient this process is. So all of those are called process characteristics. And the project characteristics, you need to understand the development dates. What are the kind of, it's not, when I say dates, it's not specific dates, it's not exact. At least a rough idea in terms of when you would have this launch. And that's why, for example, you say, I would like to have it in next quarter, or perhaps in the third quarter of 2021. If the client says like that, then you can actually come back. If the business says like that, then you can come back and work your way backwards to come up with an estimate. And also the effort, total effort involved in the project, the product size, the size of the product. It's so important. We actually forget that the first thing that we start thinking in terms of estimation is the cost or it's the effort, but it's not. It's actually the size of a particular product. So we'll talk in detail about why size of work is really important. That's the first foundation for us to actually estimate, and then comes the effort and the schedule, and then finally the cost. And then we also look at some of the components. What are the components involved? What are the kind of softwares that we're using? What kind of interfaces we could actually try and have? How are we going to interact with these different interfaces? What's the kind of integration that we have to consider? So all of these are really important for us to come up with in terms of